Hi, I'm TJ Newman, and welcome back to the Sarah O'Connell Show.
Welcome to the Sarah O'Connell Show.
TJ Newman, welcome back to the Sarah O'Connell Show. How are you today?
I am very well. Thank you so much for having me back. It is wonderful to be on the show again.
I know, right? So I worked out it was just over 2 years since we first spoke. It was your first ever interview. At the time you had your debut novel coming out, you're now a best-selling author. How is everything with you?
Everything's good. Everything's overwhelming. I was kind of thinking back to that first interview as I was getting ready for this, and I was setting up, and I was remembering I was so nervous for that interview because I'd never done it before. It's my first book. It's my first interview. It's my first anything, and I had no idea how it was going to go. And you were so kind and warm and generous in the interview, and it made me so comfortable, and it was a great interview. And I gotta say that really kind of it set the tone for how a lot of how I approached interviews going forward for the publicity, because I was like, oh, okay, people, it's just a conversation, and that's a credit to you for showing me how it's done. So thank you.
That's exactly it. And I remember reading your book and I just thought I have to have the author of this book on my show. I loved it. And I was so excited to speak to you and honored that it was your first interview as well. Incidentally, since that, for anyone that hasn't read Falling, of which I have 2 copies now, it's now being adapted into a major motion picture, Universal Studios working title as well. Did you ever imagine that could happen while you're writing this?
No, my only goal and dream with that book was to get it published. I knew it was a good story in that way, that when a story is like, there is something here that I really think would connect with people. So my big dream was, to get it published. In your wildest dreams, of course, you think of things like, oh, I would, and naturally, because my brain works that way, because I love movies like the stories that I write. I mean, there's a reason I write the stories that I write, because those are the books and the movies that I love. But you never, at least I didn't think, oh, and then this could become a movie. Like, no, I never dreamed that big.
That's incredible. And you absolutely should have, because you're doing amazingly, which we're going to get to in this interview. You are also, not only you wrote the novel, which is being adapted into a film, you're writing the script for the film. That is amazing. How is that coming along?
It is coming along very well, and it is fascinating. I am at the art and skill of screenwriting is it's incredible. You've got, in a book, when you're a novelist, you have 10 pages to depict a scene, right? And in a screenplay, you have one. So that sort of compression, that story compression, is extremely difficult to do well. And so that has been a massive learning experience in understanding how to take a story that you originally took 10 pages to tell is now going to take 1 page to tell. And it's been really instructive also in my writing as a novelist, because you just have a ruthless cutting away of anything superfluous. Right? Like in screenwriting and movies and TV shows, you just don't have the luxury of really getting into a lot of the stuff that you do have the luxury of in a novel. So it forces you to reevaluate and reevaluate and reevaluate a scene and say, okay, but what are we really doing here? What is really happening in this moment? And until you can distill it down to the purest, most concentrated, point of what you were trying to do in that scene, it's not there yet. So it's really been a fascinating new way to look at storytelling in general.
It's so interesting. And I was wondering about this. Does it give you also the chance to, obviously you're revisiting scenes from the book, but to maybe do them in slightly different ways to add more depth or different sides to the characters as well?
Absolutely. It's been it's been really eye-opening to understand, because I know there's always so much conversation about like, which is better, the books or the movies, you know, that's always sort of out there. And it's been really interesting to look and go, well, why did they make that change? Why did, you know, because it worked so well in the book, why did they do it differently in the movie? And it's fascinating to look and understand why. There's lots of things that play really well in a book that just won't in a movie. You know, a film's you know, to be on the nose, it is a moving picture. You are the only information you have is what you are looking at. Of course, what you're told, but what you're looking at. So there's just natural changes that have to take place when moving to that medium. And also, like I said, that when you have a story that's being compressed, you know, a script, you know, is a feature-length script is, you know, a little over 100 pages. A book is 300. So clearly things have to go. And as you whittle it down into what the story is, some things just don't make sense anymore.
Mm. It's so interesting. And do you have any kind of timeline at the moment of when we might see the movie, or when it might go into production or anything like that? Or is it still very much just pre-production, writing that script and getting that right at the moment?
It's moving forward, and that's just about all I can say at this point. I never am totally sure what I'm allowed to say or should say. And also too, there's a lot of people making a lot of decisions. Yeah, that's something that was really I don't know why this was surprising to me, but because it seems fairly obvious, but in both publishing and movies, like, yeah, I don't think, as someone who just read books and watched movies, I don't think I understand the thousands and thousands of little decisions and big decisions and external influences that have to come into play for a book to come to life and a movie to make it to the screen. It's a very complicated process, of which, you know, you only participate in one little part of.
Absolutely. And so I'm so excited now to talk about your follow-up book, Drowning the Rescue of Flight 1421. Can you tell me when you first started working on that? Did you come up with the idea of it when you're working on Falling?
Yeah, well, the idea for the book really started with a feeling, and it came to me at work. You know, I told this story the last time I was on the show about how I came up with the idea for Falling, and it was at work because I was a flight attendant. I flew for 10 years. The idea for the book came to me at work when I was working a flight on a red eye, you know, and it's this whole thing. You don't work in an industry like aviation for a decade and only have one idea, right? So it's like when I was coming up with the idea for what my second book was going to be, I went back to sort of some of those ideas that I'd had, some of those brainstorms that I had, and I landed on kind of the most prominent of those memories. Whereas Falling was kind of like, here is a complete concept, like striking me like a bolt of lightning. With Drowning, I went back to a specific feeling. And it happened on a red eye. Again, I only worked red eyes. They were my favorite flights to work. So I was working a red eye from Hawaii to Los Angeles. And I was standing in the forward galley looking out the small porthole window in the door, you know, and I'm looking out the window. It's night, it's the middle of the night, and I'm looking out at nothing, right? Like, it is pitch black void. There's no civilization, there's no city lights, nothing is down there, right? For miles, for hours, in every direction, there is nothing but water. And I remember standing in the galley and looking out that window, and just this feeling of isolation coming over me when you realize how isolated you are in that moment. And it freaked me out. And so that was the moment that I went back to when I was figuring out what to write for my second book, because I knew that my second book was going to have to be bigger. That was the only thing that I knew. Like it was, I had to up the ante. I was going to have to be bigger in every regard. So I went back to that primal fear because I knew that somewhere in that deeply primal, upsetting fear were the roots of a really good story.
And so, for the uninitiated, if you don't know anything about drowning, can you tell us a brief synopsis of what the book is actually about?
Absolutely. Drowning, it tells the story of the rescue of Flight 1421, a flight from Hawaii, Honolulu to San Francisco that crashes into the ocean 6 minutes after takeoff. The passengers immediately evacuate, but an explosion mid-evacuation forces them to close the doors. But it's too late. Plane floods and sinks, with 12 of the unlucky people who didn't get out in time to the bottom of the ocean. Included in those 12 passengers are a father and his 11-year-old daughter, and now their hope of survival, their only hope of survival, lies with an elite rescue team on the surface led by her mother and his soon-to-be ex-wife.
I just have to say too, that's not the plot of the entire book. That's the beginning of the book. That's how it starts.
Sarah, that's such a good point. Yes, that's the setup. That's how that is the setup to the story. And I think that it's been a challenge, actually. You pinpointed it perfectly, and that like that's the setup to the story. And people think like, oh, that's just what this book is then. It's just a big spectacle of explosions and crashes and fire and drowning and all this. But that's just the setup. The core of this story, what this story really is a survival story. It's about ordinary people in an extraordinary set of circumstances fighting against impossible odds to survive. It's about a family, a fractured family, trying to come back together. It's love, it's hope, it's resilience. It is a deeply emotional story. Somebody described it as the spectacle being a Trojan horse for a deeply emotional story of love. And I think that's exactly right.
Absolutely. And you really get to know every single character and live through every moment that they do. And I have to say, I started reading that book in the morning. I finished the book that day. I did not stop it. Well, I say that day, it was halfway through it was about 5 a.m. I finished it or something, but I couldn't stop reading it. It's that good. I was also slightly traumatized afterwards, having gone through the entire book in one day, but it is that good. And it happened with your first book as well. And just incredible from start to finish.
Thank you. Nothing makes me happier than hearing that. I know some authors are like, hey, I spent a long time working on that, like relax, take your time with it. I worked that hard and you read in a day. And for me, that is nothing makes me happier because I respect my readers' time. We are busy. We all have things to do. And if you are willing to spend hours of your time taking a risk on one of my stories, then I'm thrilled that it can be that kind of an experience and get you onto what else you need to do, because we all got a lot of things to do.
I had no choice. I was hooked. I didn't check my emails. I wasn't seeing my notifications. The TV did not go on that day.
Oh, music to my ears. Like anything that turns the notifications off. What a dream. What a dream.
Also slightly struggled to sleep afterwards, but that was good.
Now that I feel bad about. I do apologize for that.
I needed to have someone to talk to about it. So ideally, if you're reading the book, get the book also for everyone else in your house. Then you can just talk about it amongst yourselves afterwards.
There you go. There you go. Talk it through. I had a girl who said, she wrote to me and said, I'm concerned that I'm going to have nightmares afterwards. And I was like, tell them to me. I was like, come to me. let me know. I was like, I need ideas for other books too. So, you know, it'll be like a market research thing. So bring them to me. I'm more than happy to, you know, receive your nightmares.
But listening to you will be very much just therapy for me as well. So I have someone to talk to about it now, which is very important. Now, obviously, flight attendants have a lot of training for every kind of scenario, but surely this, in the level of problems that the people experience on this plane, is something that you can't really prepare for. You have to just improvise with the best of your ability, right?
Yes and no. I mean, every emergency is just sort of like a deal with the circumstances you have set in front of you, and that's why we train as hard as we can and for as long as we can, and why it's drilled into us so that we have just a basic understanding of like, okay, in a perfect scenario, this is what you would do, because in pretty much any crisis, there's not going to be a perfect scenario. You are going to be bending, you know, to whatever that specific set of circumstances is. With the ditching, which is what this story is in aviation, a ditching is what we call the emergency landing of a aircraft on water, the most famous being the Miracle on the Hudson. And so we train extensively for that. When you are training for overwater certification, which is what we call it, we get in a pool. We get in the life vest. We make this the slide raft. We evacuate from the side of the pool into the slide raft. So we do actually train in that capacity. I know some
Wow.
airlines, and I think it's American, they have a incredible training facility that makes a wave pool. Like they literally recreate the waves that you would be getting into, you know, simulate what this kind of incident would be. So
Wow.
yeah, we really do actually train in this way.
I had no idea. I just thought everyone practiced by saying where the exits were and then just hoping for the best. I
No,
mean, that's very reassuring that that extra level of detail has gone into it, which explains the books actually.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a full-blown, yeah, we're trained for it. And it's also a special certification because not every airline is certified to do overwater training like that,
Yeah.
because they don't have those routes. So it's a special certification that is a lengthy process with the FAA to get your airline certified for that, and then an extra component for the flight attendants who are going to be working those flights.
I love that so much. And one thing I was wondering, when you were writing this book or your previous one, at any point, were you ever tempted just to take a flight somewhere just to observe extra things, or is it all in your head from all that experience you already had?
All the time. The experience is there and it's great, but I tell you what, I'm always tempted to go down to the airport and just be in that environment for one, and then book a flight somewhere and just fly back and forth. And I'll tell you what, every time that I am now as a passenger on a plane, I have a completely different experience. I sit there all the time and I just watch and I feel and I observe everything going on around me, because, you know, it's, I think to a certain extent I took it for granted that I was in that environment every day for 10 years, that
Yeah.
it's little things that you forget of, you know, like, oh yeah, that sounds like that, and this smells like that, and this experience, you know, you kind of forget all those little things. So now anytime I am on a flight, it it's research again. It's a reminder, and it's research again. And I just love it. I'm blessed and fortunate enough that I'm now writing full time, so I'm no longer flying. I'm no longer a working flight attendant, but I got to tell you, every time I get on a plane, there's just something about being in that cabin that I go, this feels right. I feel at home on a plane. I really do.
I've got to say, by the way, I love your character development. It's not just random people on a plane. You care about all of them. You know about all of them, and they all react differently to different situations. And, you know, their spirit sort of shines through the book. And I love that.
Thank you. You know, that was something also that there was a lot of feedback that I consistently heard from Falling, from readers, of, I wanted a little bit more of the passengers, you know, and I wrote Falling from the perspective of crew. And when I got that feedback, it kind of like something kind of clicked in my brain. And I was like, well, that would make sense, because most people, you know, aren't pilots and flight attendants that are reading this, but they are passengers. So,
Right.
and I think that, you know, when we read works of fiction, that the closer that you can get your own lived experience to the experience that you are reading about, that it just brings a little bit more authenticity to you, because you can, you know, overlay your own personal lived experience onto it. So with this book, with Drowning, that was a focus that I had of, these passengers need to I need to dig into them and see, you know, who are these strangers that, you know, this guy sitting next to you and this girl over here, like, you know, I don't know them at all. But then you have a major crisis and suddenly, oh, we're going to get to know each other. We're going to get to know each other real fast. And that's always fascinated me. And so it was something I really dug into in this book.
Yeah, you did it so well, and you honestly feel like you're going through it with them every step of the way. It's incredible. And you mentioned earlier that, of course, you had lots of training for different scenarios, but is it true you're also SCUBA certified?
Yes, I got SCUBA certified. I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, which is a desert, but that being said, it's hot. And so like every house has a pool. So I've lived in the water my whole life growing up. I wrote, you know, with this book, anytime that I would have sort of like a roadblock and I wouldn't know what to do, I'd get in the pool or I'd get in the bathtub, and I was just constantly, you know, submerging myself, if you will. To throw a bad pun in there, but a major component of that was I got SCUBA certified, because I just knew that there was no way that that's the type of experience that I think, unless you like fully experience it and know what that's like, you don't really know what that's like, because it's a different world. It's like being on the moon. It's like a totally different experience.
You mentioned earlier that there's 12 characters that get stuck in this situation. Well, there's more to start with, bless them, but
Not everybody makes it in this one.
not,
Not
not,
everybody makes it.
not
Pour
everybody.
one out to a lot of the passengers on that plane.
You really do. But there's another character in the story as well, which is oxygen, because there's only a certain amount of it because we're underwater. Did you find out the exact sort of volume of oxygen that could theoretically be in a plane of that size, or just sort of guess how many hours they might have left?
A little bit of both. It was a little bit of guesswork, a lot of research, and that's such an interesting way to frame that. I love that oxygen is a another character in the book. I never thought about it like that, and you are absolutely right, because that was also, you know, in the book there's sort of these sort of like in between some of the chapters periodically through the book, there's like a timestamp, right? That says, you know, like time since incident and hours of usable oxygen left.
Yeah.
And it's a countdown. It's a countdown as the water's rising and the time is going down. It's sort of like an overarching presence through the entire story. I've just never thought of it as like its own presence, its own character, which I love.
It's
love
kind
that.
of like a character that I wanted to survive through the end of the book. I was like, I don't want to lose the character of the oxygen because that would be bad.
That's perfect. See, this is what I love about doing interviews like this and with an interviewer like you, is like, I've lived with this story for so long. I feel like I know this story backwards. I feel like I get this story, and then you say something like that and it's like just blows it wide open, and it's like a whole other layer of story that I hadn't even thought about. I love that. Thank you. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And thank you, by the way. I've learned loads of new acronyms while reading the book. A favorite was SRDRS, which, of course, is Submarine Rescue Diving and Recompression System.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so of course, yes, just naturally just rolls off the tongue.
It does.
Yeah. That's why I tried to shorten it. It's called the Falcon. They call it like the Falcon for shorthand. The rescue module itself that goes down to the plane. And I tried to use the Falcon as often as I could, because SRDRS does not exactly roll off the tongue. Plus, anytime you're dealing with aviation, and also military, but especially, you know, in aviation, the acronyms are going to be non-stop. There is just an acronym. I actually have a book over here in my research pile that's literally just a dictionary. It's just a dictionary of what all the acronyms mean. And I have one for flight controllers, I have one for pilots, for flight attendants. It's just anytime you see our manuals also, they're like like this. It's just nothing but acronyms and complicated systems that they try to distill down to a tidy little SRDRS label.
I love it too, because it adds that extra level of authenticity, because it's not just told from the perspective of a passenger on the plane who doesn't know what anything is. Oh, they're pressing the button thing and talking gibberish on the phone. You've got the actual language and vernacular that these people actually use, which just, yeah, as I say, it just makes the whole experience more authentic. Also, I think if you were a passenger on that plane and you're hearing things like that, it means you wouldn't necessarily understand the things that some of the people on the plane understand, and, you know, the people in the watchtower or whoever's trying to help them would say as well. It's really interesting.
You know, it's actually a really good point, Sarah. We are trained as flight attendants and as pilots that in the event of an emergency, we are to not use as technical a language as we would if we were just having a conversation between pilots and flight attendants, because that's intimidating. If you're facing a crisis and you're hearing, you know, the flight attendant or the pilot talking over the intercom and they're just throwing out a bunch of acronyms that you have no idea what they mean and they sound technical and scary, frankly, that doesn't help the situation. So we are trained to modify our vocabulary to something that the lay passenger will be able to comprehend and understand. And all of our, you know, it's funny, I got some edits, the emergency commands and a lot of the stuff that happens during the initial scenes when the crash landing and the ditch and the evacuation are happening. They're textbook. This is textbook. This is what I have. I can like recite them for you right now because they're just like burned into my brain and always will be. But it's funny because, like, you know, I'd get these editing notes back of like, change it this way, make it better this way, change this word and do this. And I'd be like, no, you don't get it. Those words were specifically chosen by the person who wrote the manual and signed off through a certification process through the FAA for that exact word choice. And no, it's not fiction. It's not the best sentence structure. It is not the you know, most fluid prose to explain what's happening, but it is exactly what would be said in that circumstance for exactly the effect of the passenger understanding what's going on, not being confused, not misinterpreting, and just simplifying this set of circumstances to enhance your best chance at survival.
Exactly. And it's another thing, as I say, that I love, because you believe that the character you're writing about know their jobs and they know what they're talking about because you know what they're talking about. And that comes through, and I think it's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, if you know, read a book like this, like, it is fiction. And I alluded to that in the acknowledgement section of my first book of like, this isn't a training manual. You know, I took liberties to make this a fictitious, fun, exciting romp. This is, you can read a training manual to know that it's like, you know, no, oh, that's what a training manual looks like. And spoiler alert, it's not a page turner. You will not be, you know, up at night flipping through the FAM, you know, you won't be. So these are definitely works of extreme fiction with a rooted, you know, foundation of training and fact.
I love it. And so one question, not a question, it's an observation actually, is that I love how you balance the tension and the drama and the emotion and all of that good stuff. Like when the tension really ratchets up, there's one chapter where you actually go back in time a little bit. And so you give the audience a chance to breathe, but you also learn more about the characters, and that plays into the story later on. It's not just there for no reason, it matters. But so you have that moment to breathe, but then you're right back in there, and it's brilliant how you did that.
So you are making my day, because literally word for word, that was my goal with that chapter. It's like the first sentence of the book is, you know, Will Kent opens his eyes I don't know the exact line, but basically the protagonist, the main character, opens his eyes and sees the engine explode. That's the first sentence of the book. And from there, it is nonstop, rock'em bopp'em sock'em trauma, chaos of the crash, of the ditching, of the sinking, of that. And taking a breath. That is exactly what my thought was after I put the reader through all of that insanity, I've got to give them a second to slow down, catch their breath, recenter themselves, and go, we have a new set of circumstances. Let's move forward from here. So yes, that chapter, which comes after the initial setup, as you were saying earlier as well, is exactly that point. It's just sort of recenter, to take a break, to take a breath and go, what now? And like I said, day made, that was what I hoped to accomplish. And if you're saying I did that makes me very happy.
And I needed it too. As I said, I read the whole thing in one day. I needed that moment just to breathe. And before I went back into what was happening. I've got one thing I wondered too is, can you tell me, is Drowning set in the same universe as Falling? So if people followed the news, would they be aware of both incidents having happened?
I set them up as entirely separate stories. They're not sequels. They're not related. There's no characters that carry over. Everything is completely separate, with the exception of Coastal Airlines, which is the airline with which the world of both books happen. And that wasn't a deliberate thing. It was almost accidental. And that when I first started writing the first draft and I'm setting up the world and doing all this world building, I almost did as like a placeholder, just like whatever, Coastal, and like threw it in there as I like continued to write and continue to do this. And then I just never went back and like came up with another airline. So I sort of accidentally, I guess, created and I only realized that like after the book, like we were done, and I realized it and I was like, oh, I'm creating like a Coastal Airlines literary universe, like this poor airline that doesn't exist and is entirely fictitious, has a really bad luck. They have some pretty bad luck happening on their planes. So yes, they're not related, but that was the one character and the one thing that kind of carried over. And now I'm kind of loving that idea that they do all exist in the same universe.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to explore that.
Yeah, I think it's a nice option for you to have, right? And it's actually a nice way of looking at those books as being what that universe would be. There's like the Cornetto trilogy of Shaun of the Dead and World's End and Hot Fuzz and stuff like that. So it's quite a nice little sort of umbrella thing to have.
Exactly. Hot Fuzz. I haven't seen that movie in so long. A working title film there. I love that movie.
So good. And then see what you can do is on book 45, you can reveal that the airline is haunted. And then
it could be. There are stories of haunted planes. That's an interesting avenue that I hadn't thought about, turning from thrillers into horror, having a haunted plane. When the only ghost experiences I've ever had in my whole life was on a plane.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep. Wasn't scary. It was just like I was boarding. I was in Florida. I think I was in Fort Lauderdale, and it was a ridiculously early flight. And I'm, like I said, I'm a red-eye person. I don't do morning flights. So maybe actually even thinking about this, maybe this wasn't even real. It's just that I'm not used to being up at that time and the coffee hadn't kicked in. And so I was seeing things. But I remember boarding the aircraft and pulling my bag to the back. I was the first one on because the crew comes on first, and I was the first crew member on, and I'm dragging my bag to the back of the aircraft. And there was just this light, this like shimmer, this like that floating in the center of the back galley, just this like shimmering floating orb of like just something and nothing. And I just stared at it as I was walking down the aisle of the plane, headed to the back galley. And as I got closer, it just sort of like dissipated into nothing.
Oh, wow.
It was very, very strange, but that's my only ghost experience that I have.
It was a good one.
Yeah. Like I
See,
said, it might have just been the coffee hadn't, kicked in yet.
yeah,
So who knows? Who
or
knows?
it had really kicked in. It's actually an interesting thing because your books are loosely connected just in that way. If you did a standalone book, which was something like that, for example, it'd be interesting because it's not directly connected to the others. People couldn't revisit the other books with the narrative of that book and then project a whole different thing onto them and give them sort of a different sort of angle of looking at them too.
That's absolutely right. It's like it's ripe for fanfic, right?
Yeah.
It's ripe for that sort of expansion. I do love it. Once I realized that like while these stories are completely and totally separate and unrelated,
Yeah.
they do kind of work in the same universe. I don't know. It did for me sort of unlock avenues of potential that I thought were really interesting.
Absolutely. I might ask too, is there a character in Drowning that you most identify with?
Chris,
Chris.
definitely.
When I wrote that question, I wrote Chris in brackets.
I love that. I love the character of Chris. She's the mother in the story. She is not on the plane. She is the pivotal character in that chapter that you were just saying, where you take a breath and sort of relax, and we recenter around her, and we recenter around her relationship, which will become central to the topside portion of the rescue of the passengers down below. And I love that character. She evolved as I wrote her. I would say the closest of my personal lived experience, sort of branching out into taking roots within a character would be with her.
Chris is an amazing character. Anytime I read a book or I watch a movie and say it's a disaster movie or whatever, you watch it and I'm normally sure somehow they're going to be okay, but I don't know how. And you just go on this journey. I got halfway through your book and I thought, she's going to kill them. They're all going to die. Nobody's going to survive because so much stuff happened. And I loved the unpredictability of the book. I literally had no idea how it was going to end. I literally got halfway through and I'm like, anything can happen to any person at any time, and to the oxygen too. It's so good. And I don't want to give any spoilers about anything that happened, but as it gets towards the end, it's brutal, it's emotional, it's beautiful, it's brilliant, and yeah, everyone should read it.
Thank you so much. And that is, that's sort of the challenge and the fun part of writing stories like this, is that you're simultaneously going, how can this be worse? Right? Like, how do I make this worse? How do I escalate the tension, escalate the conflict, escalate the danger? How do I escalate every single scene? You should be asking yourself as a writer, where's the escalation? How does this get worse? And at the same time, you have to still juggle a question of, okay, but how do we get out of it? So how do I make this worse? And then how do we get out of it? And it's a really fun challenge. I say fun now that I'm through the challenge and I sort of untangled the knot and put the puzzle together. It's not always fun in the middle of it, where you're literally going, I don't know how to get these people out of this. This is just going to be, a tragedy. Everyone dies. The end. That's the book. It's hard to see, which is not what happens. Not that I'm saying it's a happy ending either, and everybody I'm no spoilers here. I'm just saying, it's not, it's a story of the rescue of Flight 1421. So just say that.
The book is out right now in America, and because now is the 1st of June, of course, and it's out on the 8th of June in the UK. So everybody needs to pre-order it, get out there. If you're watching it past that point, you need to go get it right now. Of course, the first book had an audiobook available too, and I believe that there's a returning voice artiste for the not sequel, but the follow-up book as well.
There is Stephen. I was fortunate enough to get Steven Weber to come back. He read the audiobook for Falling. Maybe people love making the connection that he was star of the 90s TV show Wings, which took place at at a regional airport. He was thrilled to have him back, and very fortunate also to have joining him as the female component, Tony Award winning actress Lauren Benanti, which is just just crazy. Just as a person whose first dream was to be a Broadway star and who moved to New York and tried as hard as she could to be a Broadway star and failed miserably at being a Broadway star, to have an actual bona fide Tony winning capital B, capital S Broadway star working with a story I wrote. It's just, it's a pinch me moment. It's really pretty incredible.
And so I need to give you more congratulations. The book is only just coming out, but you've already sold the movie rights to Drowning to Warner Brothers for $1.5 million. Incredible. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. That was beyond pinch me moment. That was slap me across the face, because I'm not dreaming, I'm in a coma. Like I don't know how to escalate that. I'm butchering that, but it's just, it's incredible.
So amazing. And do you ever write your books with any actors in mind when you're doing that, just so you have someone visually to see while you're writing it?
Yeah, I don't at all. And I think I did it with Falling because I didn't dream that big. Like I wasn't thinking, oh yes, and then someday this story that I'm writing, by hand in this galley will turn into a movie. Like that's why I didn't do it there. And then with Drowning, I think I didn't, one, because that's not how my brain works, but also because I didn't want that to change how I perceive the characters. I think once you have a specific person, unless it's like, this is a person I'm writing for, I think a specific actor can alter how you interpret a character. And I didn't want that, but I would have sort of like vibes, you know what I mean? I'd be like, this character, and the character of Will, initially I was like, this character has the vibe to me of Jeff Goldblum in Independence Day. So that was kind of like the vibe I was working with, was like 90s era Jeff Goldblum, Independence Day, really smart guy, not the best bedside manner. Nobody really wants to give him any credibility or listen to him. So that was kind of the vibe that I gave, but I didn't write for that. And I don't write for any specific person when I do.
Okay, so now I've got a pitch for you. I want to pitch to you your next book. Ooh. Bear with me. So we've had Falling, right? You've now blessed the world with Drowning.
Right.
Book 3, Ascending. A plane takes off, can't stop going up. It's a rescue in space.
Okay. All right. All right. The wheels are already turning. That's not bad.
Not only that, here's your book cover.
Oh, you thought through the whole thing.
Yep.
I'm going to give you 5 minutes and you'll have a marketing pitch. You'll have a tagline. You'll have everything.
Turn that plane upside down. Going the other way now.
Oh, this is good. Sarah, This is good. Although I joked with my agent when I was working on this, and we hit the point of the process where it was like, I was done and it's hard and I was tired and everything, the characters are not doing what I want them to do, and the story's not doing what I wanted to do. And it's, it's like this massive cast of characters and this big spectacle and all this emotion, and I'm keeping the plate spinning in the air. And I told my agent, I was like, 3rd book, napping. Nobody does anything. It's just a book about like 2 people waking up, drinking coffee, and then taking a nap later. Like there's one setting in the book. It's a bedroom. There's a bed. That's the whole thing. Like, this is all I'm doing. I'm done. I don't think he was thrilled with that plan, so I'm not sure that one will make it. He'd probably be far more excited about your plan for book 3.
Well, that's very exciting. And you can have the people just start either just observing a plane going past and going about their day, or missing a flight and doing something else.
Yeah, exactly. It's just simple. Yeah. Oh, now you got the wheels turning in my head. Now I'm like, what it should be. Which is, it's like, how exciting is that it's like, this was an exhausting process writing this book. I worked so hard on it and I'm so proud of it. And right now in the lead up to pub, because we're recording this before everything's out, and by now when this airs, it will have come out. It's an exhaustive process. It really is a exhaustive process. But just hearing you say, like, let's talk about the next book, I'm immediately like, You know what sounds really good? Sitting down on my computer and working on that. And that's why I'm pinching myself, is that I'm living that dream. I'm living my dream come true, and that I get to do that. And it makes all the exhaustive parts of it an absolute privilege.
Well, I just have to say that having read your first book in a day and reading your second book in a day, I finished it and I just wanted to read your third book and your fourth book and your fifth book.
Oh, that's music to an author's ear. That's everything an author could ever hope for. So
No
thank you.
pressure.
Thank you for that. No pressure, you know. And I have to say, like, that's how, speaking exactly the pressure, like when I wrote Falling, nobody knew I was writing it. There was no pressure. There was no expectations. It was just a flight attendant working on, you know, a dream that she had, and that was it. Then that book came out and it did really well. And I was no longer just a flight attendant writing a little story that she hoped people would like. Suddenly the pressure and the expectations were there. And when I started writing Drowning, it was like air. It was like sort of like a ever constant presence. Another character in that story was the pressure and the expectations, and it really hampered my writing process for a while. And I had to figure out a way to sort of mentally trick myself so that I would be able to overcome that and keep writing. And that knowing that there were readers, like you just said, like you read my first book and wanted to read the second, and then you read my second book and wanted to read my third, knowing that there were readers out there who were so kind to me in that way and were so willing to take a chance and spend their time and energy and resources on my stories, that was the only way that I said, suck it up and keep going. Forget your fear, ignore the pressure, and just, for these people, tell the best story that you possibly can. That is really the only way that this book got written, was just writing for people that had that response like you had, because it really, really means a lot. So thank you.
You're very welcome. The love and care that you put into this, and the research and the knowledge and just the characters, everything that you go through in this book is amazing. I highly recommend everyone reads it. It really is amazing. I'm still thinking about it now. I have been all week since I finished it, and it's just so good.
Thank you.
And I wish I could say more about what happens in it, but I can't. But I could, but I won't. You just have to experience it as I did.
Thank you.
I also will put out there, if anyone reads it, you can talk to me about it, because I've read it too, and we can go through that together.
I love that. I just love it's to the point that I can now have conversations with people about it, because, you know, but before it's just like, yeah, it's a book and it's about this. And now that people are reading it, and I do get to have that conversation and get that feedback, because, you know, I haven't been able to hear, you know, you work hard on something and you hope it will be received well, and you're always curious about, you know, like, well, which moments stuck and which moments didn't, and which moments landed and which did I miss the mark on. And it's always kind of a surprising experience, and the feedback that you get. You know, it was something that I've gotten consistently that's kind of been like, really, was the character Andy, who, this isn't a spoiler, he's just sort of like he's one of the 12 survivors inside the plane, but even of those 12, he's well, I guess they're all kind of on even footing, you know, size-wise of character, with a few standouts. But people seem to really be responding to him. He's kind of like a little bit of a jerk. He's the problem guy, who's the guy who's just gonna, like, he's not trying to give solutions. He just wants to point out the problems, and he's gonna make everything just worse just by being a jerk. He's that guy. And it's been really interesting. A lot of people have brought him up, that he, like, really sort of, I don't know, got under people's skin, which I love and is great. But I never, you know, that wouldn't have been sort of one of the, like, first things that I would have thought would have come up when people are sort of giving their, you know, their experience with the book.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Amazing character, as they all are. And I love the whole thing from start to finish. And so Can we talk about what you're working on next? Are you very much still working on that Falling script? Have you got ideas for what you might write next as a third book?
Yes to both of those things.
Yes.
Still working on the script, still finishing that up. And then also book 3 I have is also in the works as well. And that's kind of all I'm gonna say about that. But everything is, I do have to say, like, I'm working on those things too, which was the same way that I was doing with Drowning. I was doing Drowning as I was putting out Falling. But right now we're 34 days until publication. Not that I'm counting or anything. 34 days to publication. So the majority of my focus right now is on the publication of Drowning. So
Absolutely. And I'm going to be checking out your Instagram to see if you take any spontaneous Virgin Galactic flights and over going into space for the third one.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And I've always, said, my airline that I flew with was Virgin America, Richard Branson's,
Yeah.
American domestic branch of the Virgin brand. And I've always said, Virgin Galactic, I volunteer as tribute. You're going to need, flight attendants in space. I don't know why, but I'm sure you will. And I volunteer as tribute. I would love to be a part of that. And now, as we're talking about with Ascension, it's going to be an important part of the research process. So we will just, put that out in the universe and manifest that I'm going to be a flight attendant in space, and it'll make its way into a future book. So we're just putting that out there.
It's going to happen. And then for the third interview, we can do an interview in space.
There you go. Exactly. The stories are writing themselves. This is easy, Sarah. This is
Really
just
is. This is just a brainstorming session.
Exactly. We get off of here and just start taking notes and jot all this down.
You don't need to. I filmed it.
There you go. See, this is why I need you involved. I'm a writer. I'm thinking in this, and you're a podcaster. You do this. This is your world. So it's picking up. Right. Yeah.
So, final question: have you got any messages for people watching the Sarah O'Connell Show and your fans around the world?
Thank you. That's the only message I have to share. Thank you for reading my books, for caring, for reading books at all. It's I think I'm biased, but I think reading books is important, and to see the community of readers out there and to have that community be so warm and receptive to me has been amazing. So thank you.
Well, TJ Newman, thank you for coming back on my show. I'm so excited to be able to celebrate your amazing second book, Drowning, which is out now or out soon in the UK.
My pleasure entirely. It's been a pleasure to be back, and I'll look forward to the next time that we do this. Thank you so much for everything that you do, Sarah.
And you too, and you're welcome back on my show anytime.
Thank you.
And thank you to everybody watching at home. Be sure to share, subscribe, give this video a big thumbs up, and leave lots of lovely comments. I'll see you all again soon for another episode of the Sarah O'Connell Show, possibly in space.
Take care, Sarah.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.